Yo guys, Dim here. Recently I bought this Ariel Rider E-Bike off of Facebook Marketplace. It was listed as not working, so I took it on as a challenge to fix it. The guy sold it to me for 150 bucks, and I figured for 150 bucks you really can't go wrong because this is a good bike frame otherwise. The only downside about it is that the tires were pretty bald and I didn't really like the seat, but that's really it. It took me a while speaking with the manufacturer, but I eventually got my hands on an OEM LED display because I believed that was the problem. After I plugged in the OEM LED display though, and it inserted the battery, I was getting a new error that I hadn't seen before, which was that all 5 LED lights were flashing. The bike was still working, like if you twist the throttle it would run, and if you press the light button the light turns on, so that's giving me like a good sign of life. I know that the motor works, and I know that the speed controller does power the motor. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of short or break in the communication line. I removed the controller from the bike, there's just 6 screws holding it, and then I open up the controller by removing another 4 screws to see the inside. It's completely potted, so I can't imagine that any corrosion would get in, but I'll just inspect the parts that are exposed, like these wires and this little module that's covered in heat shrink. In order to get the manual for this LED display, I actually had to find a link on Google and then go to Web Archive to recover an old version of the document. Thankfully it worked and I was able to get information on it. I looked to see exactly what that error means, and apparently it means a communication error between the controller and the display. I already know that the display is talking to the controller and able to command it to do things, but in the other way around I don't think it works. I think that the communication line from the controller to the display is either shorted or broken, so that's what I'm going to inspect. I take out my multimeter, I verify that there is continuity between the 2 communication pins, as depicted in this graph. I cut into this little module here because it looked a little funny. I noticed that there is a little bit of corrosion from moisture on it, so I decided to hit it with some contact cleaner and scrub it off, because it could have possibly been that this caused a short to ground, and that could be preventing the signal from getting sent to the LED display. After connecting the display again and putting the battery back on, I turned it on and got the same error. At this point, I was pretty annoyed. I figured that it's gotta be the controller, and I don't even want to fix the bike at this point because the controller's probably gonna be like another 80 bucks. And I'm not sure if they even sell it. What I'm actually gonna do with this bike frame is use it as a donor frame. I posted another video where I actually talked about why I don't like the current frame my e-bike kit is on, and the main reason is that the triangle in the middle is just too small. It doesn't fit the battery, and I had to mount the battery on the back, and this frame has a huge triangle in the middle, so I think it's definitely going to be able to hold the battery, and that'll allow me to put the battery in a lower spot where the center of gravity is lower. On top of that, this has a longer wheelbase than my other bike. My other bike is a mountain bike with a very short wheelbase. This one has a long wheelbase designed for cruising, which is primarily what I do on the e-bike. I don't really do any off-roading stuff, so this frame doesn't have suspension, but that shouldn't be much of a problem. I was kind of worried going into the build that that would be a problem, but in the end I find out that it not having suspension is actually not really a big deal, and doesn't make much of a difference in how it feels compared to a bike with shitty suspension anyway. The nut on this side comes off pretty easily, but you'll see that the other side's not as easy. You can see I'm really struggling to get the nut removed from the axle here. This is due to the galvanic corrosion built up between the nut and that cassette/wire protector. They're different metals, so that's what caused them to corrode. With those nuts removed, we could take off the wheel. This wheel doesn't have any torque arms, it just has torque washers, so there's no torque arms to remove, making it pretty easy to take off and change the tire. I'm saving all the parts that I can from this bike. I don't really know if I'm gonna need them, but it doesn't really hurt to have. I'm keeping the grips, I'm keeping the dust caps, I'm keeping the brakes. I was really having some difficulty removing the brake cables from these levers, I guess I just had a brain fart and forgot how you do it. On top of that, one of these brake levers was pretty smashed. The slot for the cable to pass through had been crushed so that the cable cannot be inserted from the top of the brake lever. Mind you, the reason I'm recording a voiceover and not just talking as I do it is because I'm pretty much figuring it out as I go. I've only done this once, so I don't have quite enough experience to be able to talk with confidence as I go, but in hindsight I could tell you what I did wrong. I really like how this throttle has the kill switch built into it. I didn't know that that's how it's done, but I guess it makes sense. The throttle that I'm using doesn't have that kill switch, but I really wish it did. It'd be nice for when you put people on the bike and you just hit the kill switch so that they don't accidentally throttle and lose control. Besides that, you can see that I'm cleaning the bike as I go. It didn't start as a very clean bike. It had a bunch of dust, dirt, mud all over it. The previous rider didn't do much to clean it, so there's dirt in crevices that you normally couldn't reach if you didn't take off all the components like I've done here. So I'm using this opportunity to clean it. I want to remove the fenders because I do not trust fenders at the speeds that I'm going to be going. I've heard horror stories of fenders getting caught in the tire, breaking off, and just ruining some people's ride. I'm also removing this front light. I don't have a connector for it yet, but I plan to hook it up to my system because I would like to maintain that front light. It's in a nice position. Like I said, these fenders need to go. Turns out I have to drop the tire in order to get the fender out. Well, I was going to need to do that anyway, so that's fine. I'm trying to maintain all the hardware and put it back on the bike as much as I can, because I just like having the hardware where it was. I don't want it to get lost. Now we're finally pulling out the bike. This is what I originally built. This is what I originally put the battery on. I had a ton of difficulty with this bike because I did not plan ahead. And the frame was really just never made to be an e-bike. There's no good position for the battery. The wheelbase is too short. The rider sits too high. It's honestly terrifying to ride. It's not a chill ride. We have to disconnect the 3 phase wires that are inside of this box. We're going to reuse this box on the new build. Disconnect all the various connectors. Cut all the zip ties. I have another milk crate here for all these components that I'm ripping off. Out comes the speed controller. I don't think I mentioned this, but if you didn't know, the speed controller I think is faulty. It has an issue where it cuts out way too frequently, and I don't think it's my battery, and I don't think it's my motor, so I'm pretty sure it's the controller. I'm planning on replacing this with a FlipSky OpenVSC based controller. I want to get a 75-200 FlipSky controller, and with that I'll just be able to use it in my future builds if I ever plan to use a bigger motor. I know my battery can handle a lot more amps because I use very big bus bars. But unfortunately my controller at the moment, I think it has a problem. We're going to use it anyways because it's rideable as long as I don't give it too much throttle at once. And it's all I got. I'm actually planning to take this controller and put it on a 1500 watt build instead of this 3000 watt build, and I think it'll run just fine on a 1500 watt motor, and I'm going to build that for my uncle. And I'm also just going to get myself the OpenVSC based controller. I would love to configure that controller. I love when I'm able to just tinker with things on a deep level. I'm having some difficulty getting these hose clamps off, and I would totally advise cutting them and just replacing them with new hose clamps. I don't have any new hose clamps at the moment. I do have metal straps, which I might end up using. I know these hose clamps don't really bear a lot of load because they're further away from the motor, so they're not really taking a lot of force. But still, I'm not an engineer, and they use hose clamps for a reason, because of that little worm screw, preventing anything from backing out. I cut my hose clamps down, which is why it was a little bit harder to get out of the slot. It's good if you're disassembling a bike to keep track of how many spacers you're using on each side, in case you're going to put it back together. One of the most annoying things about building a hub motor e-bike is figuring out the spacers for the rear dropouts. It's time consuming, it's difficult, it requires constantly paying attention to what is lining up. You need to line up the disc caliper, and you need to make sure the tire is centered, and there needs to be no interference with things like the derailleur. The reason why it's especially difficult is because things get shifted around as you tighten down the nuts. So even though things might be lined up, once you tighten down those nuts, all of a sudden something's rubbing against something, and then you have to go back, loosen it, add a washer, tighten it, test it with the torque arm, and then finally you'll eventually get it. But it's just time consuming. This is the part where I'm swapping over the discs from the other. Right now I'm only doing the back, but I'm also going to do the front wheel because the bike from where these came from had smaller brakes on both the front and back, and that's actually one of the best things about this Ariel Rider frame. It uses pretty large disc brakes, which it should, because this is a electric motorized bike. It goes pretty fast, and you need big brakes to slow that down and not overheat. 3 of these threads inside the hub motor are actually stripped, and so the disc brake really only holds on from 3 points, and they're not even 3 good points, they're 3 points on the same side. I'm still going to put the other screws in and just use a bunch of Loctite to hopefully fill out the threads, and so that when you press the brakes, they're acting against the brakes even if they're not fully threaded in. It really sucks, and I don't know if they make like replacement plates or replacement housings for these motors. If they did, I wish I could order one. In case you're wondering how I managed to strip them, I was riding on this bike one day and I heard like a grinding noise coming from my rear tire. I thought maybe a rock kicked up and then got stuck in something, so I was just hard braking. And then eventually the noise went away, but then I got home and I realized I only had a front brake left. That's because what happened was that all of the 6 screws backed out due to vibrations because I never put Loctite on them. And that's the day that I ordered Loctite. I put 6 new screws inside, but one of the threads was already stripped. 2 of the threads were already stripped. One of them was just destroyed. Like, the torque from the disc and the screw actually caused part of the hub to break off. So there's a tiny access port in my hub now that wasn't there by design. But I think there's still enough threads on there and enough screws on there to handle the braking force. I just need to constantly supervise it, and I am using Loctite this time. You live and learn. And if you're watching this and for some reason didn't already know this, use Loctite on your brakes. Use Loctite in a lot of places on a bike because it experiences a lot of vibration, but when it comes to brakes and anything related to your safety, use Loctite. I'm using Loctite Blue. That one torque washer wasn't able to fall into place, and that was actually just because the cassette had been so bent that it was preventing it from doing that. So I pulled back on it and it bent back out. Now I'm doing the front wheels brakes as well. Like I mentioned, this bike has bigger brakes on both the front and back compared to my other bike, which I'm very, very grateful for. The other bike's brakes were actually overheating when I got back home. I think they measured something around like 200 Fahrenheit, maybe more. If you're using an impact gun to put in brake screws, just go gentle and then torque them down by hand. I don't have a torque wrench, so I'm just kind of eyeballing this until it's snug. The Loctite should make up for it. We are getting very close. This bike looks pretty awesome. I love these tires with the reflective strips. These are street tires, and I just really like how they look. I'm connecting those 3-phase wires from the motor to the speed controller. Initially I have the speed controller pointing down, but then I come to my senses, I flip it around, and it's going to be facing up, so that those connectors to the accessories on the handlebar are closer. Now we just have to mount the various accessories to the handlebar. You might notice that I put a bunch of waterproof connectors on all of these. If you order this same kit, the 3000 watt NBPower kit, it does not come with waterproof connectors. That's something that I cut and I crimped on myself. It's honestly pretty surprising to me that the NBPower kit doesn't come with waterproof connectors. They give you like a bag to put the controller in, but it doesn't fit anything more than the controller, so it's not like you could put the wires in there. So they just kind of expect you to have the wires dangling outside the bike, but they still don't give you waterproof connectors, so you kind of have to make do. You know what I mean? I'm not very happy with this NBPower kit. I don't think I would buy it again, but it's kind of the only option on the market, and they do have a very good price. I guess I'm sacrificing quality for price with this kit. I know some people have had a wonderful experience with them. I personally don't see it. And you know what, sometimes you get a good experience from a cheap product, and that's just the variance in quality control working in your favor, and then there's another person on the other end who gets a terrible experience. Finally, and we really are almost there. I removed this seat because it's just too high. This is supposed to be like a suspension seat post for comfort or whatever. I don't know, it looks stupid, and it makes the bike way too tall for me. So I swapped it with this other seat that I had lying around on a different bike, and happened to be the same tube. So I just took the bike for a test ride, and man, it is awesome. So much better than it was on my other frame, hidden over there. It's a nice big frame. It has a long wheelbase, plenty of space in the middle here, where the triangle is, to fit both the battery and the speed controller. I am super pleased with how this turned out, and very happy to have this as a daily driver. Literally, there's nothing wrong with it. I thought that maybe because I didn't have a front fork that it would feel too bumpy, but it didn't at all, surprisingly. I guess because I'm only riding it on the street. Maybe if you were to take it off-road, that's when you would start to kind of suffer from the lack of suspension, but I don't plan to go off-road. The brakes work great. I love having these big disc brakes. The other ones that I had were very small, definitely not right to have on an e-bike, and the motor did get quite hot. The brakes stayed quite cool, so seems good to me. I was doing some pretty hard riding, getting it up to top speed. I think I hit 46 miles per hour on my top run, at least according to the speed here on the display, and I think that's accurate. If I were to guess, it's probably a little bit higher than that. There is such little clearance right here, and even less clearance down there, where the tire touches the frame. But it was actually fine. I never heard it rubbing or anything, and it looks like it didn't rub at all. Just inspecting the frame. I think that this shifter here needs to be lubed, because as you can see, it's very stiff. If I move it with my hand, it doesn't return to its position, and that made it so that when I was doing hard pedaling, the chain would constantly slip, so I need to lube those components there. This is what the pedal assist hooks up to. I haven't connected it. I still have the pedal assist wire dangling down there, and I still need to convert this connector to be compatible with this connector here, so that I can get both brake levers to cut off the engine. At the moment, only this left one cuts the engine. I'm actually just going to throw some saddlebags on here right now. These are the saddlebags that the owner of this Ariel Rideal included with the bike. So it's nice and secure. Comes with these velcros on the back to strap to this. that out. Looks pretty good. So I just had to adjust the brakes. Let's take it for a spin with the camera on. The battery's only 35% right now, so it's not gonna have full amps, but it'll still hit top speed. In assist 2, we get up to 30. That ambulance is looking at me like I'm his next fucking client. Show you how good this bike is at going uphill. I see a guy pushing his bike uphill. Pretty smooth brain right now since I don't have a helmet on. Little top speed run. Looks pretty clear. Couldn't quite hit top speed because I had that red car pull out, but I'll hit it on the way back here. All right. That's it. Like I said, uphills are literally no challenge for this bike. You just fly uphill. You just fly in general.